everyone, and a warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us today at VOX ISKL. Our commitment is to create an inclusive ISKL where we all belong. VOX ISKL has been developed to provide a platform for guest speakers and internal experts to share perspectives and insights on our DEIJ journey at ISKL, as well as grapple with changes and challenges and complexities together. We are joined today by many of our community members and our external community partners and friends of ISKL within KL and Kuala Lumpur and within Malaysia. And I think we also have external partners outside of Malaysia. The International School of Kuala Lumpur has collectively embarked on a courageous journey on DEIJ. We have committed to reflecting, to learning, and to taking action. We're committed to DEIJ not only because of the global call to action and movement around racism, but we also believe that it is our responsibility as educators to protect our children and adults in our community against inequity and injustice. We know that our communities of learning thrive and succeed because of the diversity of our being, diversity of our knowing and expressing. We will become more diverse when the purpose, the practices, and the ecosystems of our learning are equitable, inclusive, and just. We will become more diverse when ISKL continues to safeguard our learning community, mindful of the diverse identities of our children and our adults. We will also become more diverse when the individuals at ISKL can participate, lead, thrive, and succeed given their most authentic selves. The identities of our children here at ISKL and the adults in our learning community and our strong beliefs on intercultural competence and global citizenship are all bedrocks of our culture of care, inclusion, and connection. However, we also know that while it is a powerful lever, it is not enough. Therefore, we continue to harness our collective capacity to learn and reflect on the principles and practices of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, to courageously challenge ourselves to take actions against systemic racism, marginalization, and oppression, and against biases and stereotypes that are harmful to marginalized identities. As a learning community, the lives and learning of our students and educators are at the heart of what we do here at ISKL. As we move forward this year, we continue to challenge ourselves, our systems, within our internal and external learning partners in order for us to redesign a more strategic pathway moving forward for all of our community. We are so strengthened here at ISKL by our collective capacity, empathy, and care. So as we move forward today, before I introduce our panelists, I would like to share with you a little bit of our norms today. And this is part of our learning. Part of our norms for learning today is to accept non-closure. We only have an hour today. And so we hope that this session today is a seed, a provocation, a starting point for a lot of other conversations and discussions that you're going to have in your community, with your families, with your kids. And so we anticipate that after this session, you will leave with more questions and thoughts. We also sit with discomfort because it is in that space beyond our own comfort zone where we stretch our thinking and our learning. At this point, allow me to introduce to you our incredible panel. We'll start with our external panel today. Joellen Killion is a champion for educator learning as the primary pathway for student success. Joellen leads, facilitates, and contributes to a number of initiatives related to examining the link between professional learning, professional development, and student learning. In her role as consultant and learning facilitator, she serves school systems, schools, regional, state, and national agencies within the United States and overseas. Joellen is a senior advisor to Learning Forward and was formerly its deputy executive director. She is also a frequent contributor to education publications and the author of multiple books and papers in the design, implementation, and evaluation of professional learning, coaching, and teacher leadership. Welcome, Joellen, to our community again. We have long partnership with Joellen since last year. Our next panelist is Abena. Abena promotes discussions around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, both inside within ISKL and outside of her role as a secondary teacher and DEIJ team leader at ISKL. She shares her knowledge, experiences, and skills as a conference speaker and workshop trainer at international education events. Abena is committed to seeking and developing ways to share understanding on social justice issues with practical resources and approaches. Abena is currently studying for her doctorate in education through Bath University in the United Kingdom and believes that the best role a teacher can have is that of a reflective, lifelong learner. Thank you, Abena, for carving out your time today. I know you're teaching and you spent some time with us here today in our panel. Our last panelist we have with us, Khor, is a staff representative of the DEIJ Data Committee at ISKL. As a former lawyer, she specialized in transactional law, focusing on capital markets and insurance, and driven by her passion for behavioral cognitive career learning and development, she joined ISKL as a talent and culture strategist and assists with its organizational performance transformation and talent development. Thank you, G, for carving out your time as well to join our community today. At this point of our time together, Joellen will share with us her expertise on courageous conversations before we head into our panel discussion thereafter. Joellen, off to you.
Thank you so much, Joel, and I am honored to be with all of you today. It is just a great opportunity to talk about the kind of interactions we all want to have to be able to realize the dream that Joel described for our schools, our students, and our own lives. And that requires us to be willing to engage in courageous conversations. Yet when we hear that term, courageous conversations, sometimes our image of what they are gets clouded by the notion that maybe they're a little bit terrifying. Perhaps we're frightened to have them. We might hold some trepidation about what might exist in a courageous conversation. So I'd love for us to think about them today rather than courageous conversations. And I admit they do take courage. I'd rather have us think about them as opportunity conversations. Opportunity conversations are the kinds of conversations in which we can all learn and grow. They open our eyes, they open our hearts, and they open our minds to learning, to inquiry, to address and talk about issues that may be sensitive and a bit challenging. So if we can just shift our thinking that courageous conversations are things that might be a little scary to engage in, to opportunity conversations where we have a chance to learn and grow and build a common understanding of one another so that we can appreciate, that we can understand, and that we can seek to know one another. So opportunity conversations, friends, are those that do take courage, they take confidence, and they take some competence. And that's what I hope we'll have a chance to explore together as we're moving through this part of our work. So let me talk about an image that I like to use to help you understand the essence of what a courageous or opportunity conversation is. It's a time when people share what they're thinking with one another, where their ideas are flowing freely, where we can create an understanding and an appreciation of one another, even when we perceive that we may have deep differences. And it's through opportunity conversations that we can resolve conflict, we can inquire, and we can address complex issues. They're conversations that come from the heart, conversations where we can speak our truth with one another without judgment, without risk, and with a deep appreciation for one another. Let me explore with you when these kind of conversations are most useful. They're most useful when we are resolving conflict. And conflict occurs around us all of the time. I may have a conflict with my husband about unloading the dishwasher or how laundry gets done. I may have a conflict with my neighbor. I may have a conflict with a colleague or a friend over something that may be significant or may be really insignificant. But when we have differences, I may want to use this kind of conversation when there's a topic that we want to address with each other that we know must be addressed. Perhaps something has been said or insinuated about one of us, and we want to set the record straight. Sometimes we share conversations like this. We engage in conversations when we want to share our perspective or our belief so that others can understand and appreciate who we are, what our identity is, so that we can learn to work collaboratively together. Opportunity conversations are great opportunities to inform. We inform one another by engaging in these conversations, by sharing our perspectives, our beliefs, our values, our backgrounds, our culture, our identity. And we sometimes open these conversations simply to inquire, to learn, to seek from another person something that is not known to us. And if we know it, it might help us understand and appreciate the other more fully and more completely. So we each have opportunity conversation needs. And I'm going to ask you just to take a moment right now to think about someone that you might want to have an opportunity conversation with. And what might that conversation be about? I wonder if it's about a situation where you've been misunderstood or where your full self has not been transparent. You haven't been able to be truthful. I wonder if it's a situation where it's a family member that you're struggling to understand and appreciate. Think about a person and think about a situation. Because as you think about that, I want you to hold that in your mind as I unpack with you a process, kind of a step-by-step guide that I want to share with you for an opportunity conversation. So I'm going to walk you through the steps, going to describe them to you so that you can go back, think about them again, and think about this conversation that you want to have. Because I am hoping that after hearing the steps, you'll gain the courage, the confidence, and the competence to be able to proceed. There are 7 steps in the process. And the first one, and probably one of the ones we don't think about enough, is to be prepared mentally. And being prepared mentally means that we want to gain a sense of neutrality. We want to be able to put aside negative feelings or judgments that we might be making about the person we want to invite in to this conversation. So we want to be as open and honest. And as a matter of fact, a really simple strategy is to think of 3 good things that you know about this person. Consider what your interests are in holding this conversation. Many of us withhold our courageous conversations, and by withholding them, we create even more ill feelings. And so what is it that you want to be able to gain from this conversation? And then we also want to think about what the other person's reason for engaging in the conversation might be. This is not my conversation with you. This is a joint conversation in which each of us is contributing. And then we want to enter this conversation with a willingness and an openness to learn, to inquire, to be informed. And when our mental set is right, and that might take some of us a while, then we can move to step 2. And step 2 is being clear about what the focus or topic is for the conversation. It's a single topic or conversation. It's not things that I've been packing away for months and months and months that I want to bring forward. I want to learn a way to have these conversations frequently, more often, as a way to minimize those gunny sacked types of issues that we store and then we explode, and really we can't do anything about it at that point. So what's the topic? What's the issue that we want to explore? And we want to be willing to modify that issue or topic, because I might be bringing my topic, yet I want to invite my partner, my colleague, to share his or her topic so that we can come to some agreement about that. And it may be that we're having 2 separate conversations, first about my topic, and then moving into having a conversation about the other person's topic. And then the next step is to describe my perspective. Why is this topic important to me? What is it that I want to share with you about this topic? And I want to do that in a neutral way. I want to do it without judgment, without assumptions. I want to own that it's my perspective, and I want to share any examples that might be possible. And then I want to also make sure that we share why this topic is important. I want my colleague to know why this is so important to me. And often what's important is really to be understood and appreciated, perhaps in a way that I haven't been before. And I also want to be willing, and this is where courage comes in, to share what the consequences might be if we can't open this conversation for further understanding. If my partner is unwilling to hear me out, if my partner is unwilling to work with me, then there might be some consequences, and those consequences might be the status of our relationship. In most cases, people are more than willing to jump in and join into a conversation, particularly when they understand the reason why it's important. And then I want to invite my colleague to engage and respond. And my hardest action at this point is to be quiet, to listen fully, deeply, without judgment, without bias, without interruption, to listen, to truly seek to understand my colleague's perspective. I want to paraphrase and acknowledge as my colleague is speaking. I want to understand and reflect what my colleague is saying. And then after my colleague has shared his or her perspective, this is the time when we can decide together what our next steps will be. It might be, as Joel said, that we accept non-closure, or that we decide on a strategy or a plan for how we will work together more openly and fully in the future. And together we make that decision. And once we've made that decision, we each do our very best to hold up our end of that decision. And we also make a commitment to come back together to review and revisit what we've agreed to. Because perhaps what we've agreed to maybe was only for a temporary period of time, just to get a sense of how it would work. Or maybe we want to change what we've agreed to after a period of time, because now we have discovered that we've entered into a different kind of relationship, one in which we can each be appreciated more fully. When we gain the courage, the confidence, and the competence to enter into courageous conversations, I contend that we will be able to live in a world with greater diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So I'm going to leave you with this thought, and that is each conversation we have, whether we consider it courageous or not, holds an opportunity to experience the essence of another person, to elevate the voices of those who are quiet or unnoticed, and to take individual and collective responsibility for honest, open, and constructive engagement that will allow us to be able to honor each other with diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Thank you for letting me share this perspective with you, and I look forward to engaging with my panelists.
Thank you, Joellen. Thank you for sharing with us that purpose, the process of courageous conversations, or as how you reframed it and redirected us to an opportunity conversation with the hope that it will further strengthen our confidence and competencies as we invite and engage others. This really reminds me of the work of Margaret Wheatley around conversations support us in rediscovering the joy of thinking together. And that is so powerful in the complexities of the work that we do in schools and in our communities. What also resonated with me is that around speaking your truth, sharing our identities, and being deep inquirers of each other's perspective. That is so powerful. So thank you, Joellen, for sharing that. As we invite our panelists to engage us in a conversation, we'll move on into really the first question that's really open to Abena, to G, and to Joellen around how does an equitable, inclusive, and diverse school look, sound, and feel? And what opportunities do we have at ISKL around this?
I'm happy to speak to that initially, and then I'm sure that Joellen and G have wonderful thoughts that they can share as well. So I think when it comes to this question, it's really interesting because each person is going to have a very different imagining of what that might look, sound, and feel like. And I think it is very much context and value dependent. Having said that, I think when it comes to how it looks, it probably looks exactly like it does now. You look around yourself, you look around your community, you see those areas of representation and underrepresentation. Hopefully we elevate and we promote the idea that our children can look around and see models for themselves. So we know that in our own international context, we have a range of identities that are intersectional. In other words, they're layered with culture, with ethnicity, sexuality, gender, ability, and those things aren't necessarily visible. And we need to be really careful about making assumptions around those things. And I speak from personal experience. Often when people look at me, whichever country I'm in, they tend to think that I'm local and are often quite surprised to find out that I'm British, and even more surprised to find out that I'm from Ireland. So that's just what's visible, and that's just my nationality. But of course, we can go deeper with the other layers. And it is very important that we use the time to get to know each other as a community, so we know what identities we have within that community and make space to celebrate and make them matter. And I think on that idea of mattering, that we really pay attention to the idea that we're not just tolerated, that we're not just welcomed, not just belong, but also matter. Because a lot of this work sometimes can feel a bit individualistic and as if it might be about individual egos, individual self-esteem. But the fact is, if somebody is not their full authentic self and they don't feel like they matter, then they're not going to be able to contribute to the wider community. That means it impacts everybody. So it is a social act to promote DEIJ. It is not about one individual being able to feel better about themselves and feel like they belong, although that is absolutely essential for a healthy community. It's also about understanding that we all benefit, we all gain from diverse perspectives, diverse identities, and from that idea of everybody mattering.
Thank you, Abena. I just quoted you in the chat, not just belong, but matter. This is really powerful. And for all of you, as Abena and our panelists would share, please feel free to type in some of your thoughts on the chat, share with you what resonates with you in that, and we can connect with that one later. G, what are your thoughts about our first question?
Just to really expound on what Abena has shared, having this supportive and encouraging environment really built and construct a safe psychological space. And this is achieved and sustained when all levels of our members of the school community work together with thoughtfulness, with respect, and with trust. And it is really about extending the sense of belonging and the sense that we matter, quoting Abena, and being conscious of our identity parity and in line with our team of courageous conversations today, we're coming from a place of strength and courage and not from a victimizing or a deficit.
Thank you, G. It's so powerful when you talk about getting to know people and their identities. And that has been a lot of the work that we've done here at ISKL. A lot of professional learning happens in elementary school, middle school, and high school. Our operations team have also been engaged in really unpacking the overt identity and also the deep-seated identity of our teams. So when we get to know each other, we avoid some of those harmful assumptions and biases. But it's also an opportunity for storytelling to get to know one another as part of that community building here at ISKL. Thank you, G, for sharing that. Joellen, would you like to share an additional thought around that?
It's very difficult to follow these two brilliant panelists with my thoughts. I agree with everything they said. I would add that school is such an important place for students to learn the skills of engaging in conversation, holding and appreciating differences, being able to be critical thinkers. And so I would speak to having a curriculum that deeply addresses both the hard skills as well as the soft skills that are necessary. And I'll see that in a school where I will see students and hear students ask and inquire of one another who they are and what's important to them. And as you mentioned, Joel, storytelling, allowing students to share the story of their identity and having each of us appreciate what we can learn from those stories.
Thank you, Joellen.
And staff too, not just students, staff too, sharing their stories.
Absolutely. It's really a community work to be able to get to know each other. I was in a classroom yesterday in 5th grade, and a lot of the kids were developing their own identity map of who they are and who they are not. And so getting to know that perspective really is that deep understanding about our own identity and how we can support each other in building that storytelling. You mentioned as well, Joellen, around that whole idea of like deeply and intentionally embedding some of those skills in our curriculum. One of the goals that we have here at ISKL, and that's another committee that we have carved out, is really looking into what are those DEIJ components or identity learning that will be embedded in our curriculum as we move forward in this work together. Thank you. So I'm going to transition us a little bit further into a bit more of a visioning, really thinking around what are our vision and sort of radical imagining of an equitable and inclusive school. And through that radical imagining, how have we engaged in courageous and opportunity conversation within ISKL? I would like to share this back to Abena and G.
So it's really about honoring the different access points and cultivating the seamless blends and alignment of awareness, of understanding, and of implementation of DEIJ. So it's about taking the theoretical concepts and making them practical and visible in our environment. So communicating this can be a challenge, especially when it involves diverse people with different ideological beliefs and background. For example, one of the schools is called Khor. It's a long-term collaboration which was rolled out during our staff and faculty in service day, where we grouped 3 people randomly to form a triad. So the group members will get to know each other authentically and be their wellness partner all year round, almost like a regular internal temperature check. And we wanted to give our people a chance to get to know each other by creating this opportunity to start and sustain conversations. When we set up the groups, we did get some requests from our people who wanted to be able to choose people that they're already comfortable with or are nervous about who they're going to be grouped with. But once they started their first conversation, people realized that everyone has a different story to share. And DEIJ starts with these little things that we do daily. And it just takes a little courage to step out of our comfort zone, because courage is not in the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing in spite of fear. people often just need a little nudge along the way, that underneath a huge disruption lies small changes that we all can contribute to, and that is what matters. And most of the time, we're just there to remind each other to be a bit stronger, to be a bit kinder, a bit braver, and to really establish this common understanding and traveling this journey of learning, growth, compassion together. It is so powerful how this paradigm shift can touch hearts and change minds of our people.
Wow, that is so powerful, G. Thank you for that. You talked about the whole complexity about this abstraction. There's so many complex ideas and thinking and perspectives, and we have carved out some of those opportunities to get started. And you talked about the whole idea of creating those safe spaces, but also you talked about starting and sustaining those conversations in those safe spaces. That is powerful input in there. Thank you. Abena?
So thank you very much, G. I think, what you said was so articulate and reflect deeply the journey that we're on. Some things that really stood out to me from Joellen and G's comments were things around curriculum, access points, awareness, and understanding. And I feel that DEIJ is a journey that is messy and it's complex. And we can't point to any one organization, individual, or group that has managed to work this out in a smooth and error-free way. We stumble. We learn from those mistakes, we regroup, and we continue. And in terms of this sustainability, I think something that has been very powerful for us as a community this year is to have our committees that are focused on different areas. One of those committees, of course, is data. And I think that everything we do really does need to be and continue to be grounded in that data because, excuse me, we can talk about statistics and we can also talk about those qualitative comments that come from the stories that we gather. And as a community that does care, that wants every member to thrive, we know that our actions are not based on wishful thinking, idealism, models from other countries or organizations. It's based on our own reality. So when we build those cultures of trust, which G spoke to in terms of our triads and other ways that we have meeting spaces, we know that what we are doing is relevant and speaks to the people that we are trying to work with and through to ensure that we have equitable practices for all.
Thank you, Abena. This time around, we talked about radical imagining, looking into the vision of how equitable and inclusive school can look like. And you shared so articulately the different opportunities for those courageous conversations. And so through this, we can go into the weeds of what might be the challenges that we are facing at the moment. What are the challenges of those as we continue our journey on DEIJ? And what might be your thoughts around the actions that we have taken as a community?
So challenges is about the newness of the concept and different access points, like what we've mentioned earlier. And what I truly believe in ISKL's strength is in our belief that every member of our community should have equitable access to this knowledge of DEIJ, as well as opportunities to improve and develop themselves. So we've strived to be very intentional and inclusive in this process of bringing closer all levels and members of our community. For example, for professional development and learning, our operations teams are moving in parallel at the same pace with our instructional teams and finding value in our collective learning and engagement. And we can intend to continue that, harmonizing this level playing field and ensuring that no one is left behind. This is what has been always our intention, to which we try our best to deliver.
And if I can just add on to that, I want to be very real about the challenge of this. And I think that one of the greatest areas that we have had to face and deal with and grapple with really is the vocabulary and ensuring that we all have that shared vocabulary. It's part of our DEIJ literacy that people understand the concepts and not just definitions, but the underlying values that hold them up and make them important to us. And I know I can share an anecdote. Recently, we had somebody join our DEIJ committee, which is wonderful. And it is wonderful to see that people are continually doing that the more we reach out. And the person came in very honest and vulnerable, and 1 minute into our conversation said, can we just stop? I don't understand these terms that we're using. I don't really know what you mean when you talk about intersectionality. I'm not really sure how you're using the word equity. So we paused, and it was wonderful to have that person. They turned out to be such a valuable contributor to our team by not knowing. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make here is you don't need to get to a certain level of education or be a certain distance along the journey to feel that you can contribute. Your questions are also contributions. They help shape the direction of the learning for everyone, and it helps us ensure that it is equitable and inclusive.
Thank you, G and Abena. Yeah, go ahead.
Abena and G, you offer such amazing ideas, and I'd like to just add this notion that we all come into every situation with a frame that makes up who we are. It's a frame of our understanding. It's a frame of our perspective. It's a frame of our sense of who we are. And that frame is a frame that I hope we want to grow and expand and understand in different ways. When we box ourselves in, we sometimes end up making judgments, and it's judgments that we make without full understanding. I think that makes this work really difficult. Being willing to inquire, to ask questions, to take time to reach common understanding of terminology and processes is such an important part of this work. Rather than assuming people know and people understand in exactly the same way I do, I want to understand your perspective so that we can grow. So judgments, lack of understanding, lack of a willingness to inquire and to grow our own understanding, I see our challenges that exist that we want to overcome. And I think we can overcome those very easily.
Thank you, G, Joellen, and Abena. I can imagine right now, all of us in our community who are listening are stretched in our own thinking around so many of these. And I think what really resonates with me is the whole idea of that when we participate in our own authentic selves, our identity, we come in with our own frames of reference and perspectives, but at the same time, we're challenged as well in grappling with those abstractions of the context and then supporting each other with those abstractions so that we can find specificity that will support us in our own context in this work. So thank you for that. It is so powerful framing that we can access in different points of view. Please continue to type in the chat. I know we have one question here. I would like to call on probably Abena to be able to share her thoughts around this. Cheryl asked a question, does learning to speak out courageously avoid or encourage the woke movement? Abena?
Okay, so as somebody who has their name mispronounced often, can I just clarify, is it Cheryl or Cheryl? Would you mind turning on your mic?
Cheryl, thanks, Abena.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl. So I just want to make sure that I understand the question. And I'm wondering if in that question, you're talking about the idea of, people being woke, but not actually having any impact or taking action. Is that what you're referring to?
Sometimes speaking out create a lot of conflict, and we don't really want to deal with to go through the whole process of explaining and justifying, or even making ourselves, find a lot of resources to find out more, and actually, in a way, leads to extremism. And this is what we see happening. The threat of the woke is so real now.
Okay, so I think this probably goes back to Joellen's frame around courageous conversations and the steps that we need to take, as well as the intention that we come to the conversation with. Certainly, I feel that the conversations that are most meaningful and impactful are those where there is a genuine curiosity, where there's a spirit of inquiry and people really want to learn and do better. Now, sometimes this work can feel very performative. It's an act, it's a face that an organization or an individual puts forward to say that they are woke or to give that appearance. But when we enter this with the real intention for change, we're going to feel discomfort. we're all going to have blind spots and areas that we need to address in terms of our personal learning. It does not matter how many layers of identity we have in terms of marginalization or intersectionality, like we all have learning to do. And we all have to trust our community that has expressed this desire to learn together, that that's what we're doing. We're not doing this for show. We're not doing it to tick a box or get a certificate. We're doing it to have impactful change. That means that we absolutely will expect and experience discomfort. We will experience challenges to our values and our sense of self. We will have realizations that we have been a part of a system that has hurt other people, regardless of our skin color or our other identity backgrounds. So in terms of whether this learning avoids or encourages the woke movement, I believe myself, and I can only speak for myself, that this is a separate idea. This is a separate movement. It comes from a different place. And if it is intentional, authentic, labels are not really what we're going for. We're going for change. And the value and the authenticity and ultimately what we're going to be judged by is the outcome. And that's not going to be, well, you look and sound like you're doing the right thing. It's going to be that every member of our community, from our students to everybody who interacts with them, has a strong sense of self and understands how that sense of self contributes to the wider community. I hope that's something to address your question. I think it's a big one that we could probably have its own session on. If you have other thoughts on that, Cheryl, please do share.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's a powerful question. And I think, Abena, that was a really impactful idea that you've shared with us around the power of differentiating between intent and impact, and that kind of, we're all learners in this process. A quick question as well from some of our team participants today, really talking about, what do you mean by woke movement? What is that? Would you like to share that a little bit, Abena?
I'm happy for somebody else to take the floor on that. I feel like I've spoken quite a lot now. It'd be good to hear another perspective.
I'm happy to speak briefly to it. I think it is the intent of elevating and appreciating ideas about diversity and equity. There are lots of interpretations of what that means. They can certainly be twisted and interpreted through people's intention. I love the idea, Abena, that being woke is about having clear intentions to support diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Although I don't believe that that is always the intent of people who claim to be or want to be. So it's both an awareness, but I also think awareness is insufficient, and action is really critical. Action that supports all people, everyone, to be treated with honesty, with respect, with appreciation, to be heard, to be included, to become a member of a community, to matter. I love that. That to me, if I could define woke in a new way, it would be to create a movement that we are all joined together to promote change so that every single person matters. I think there are, again, so many understandings and various interpretations of that concept that we want to talk about what it means. And I suspect those of you here joining us today would have other ways of describing and defining it. And I'd love to hear those.
And if I can just add on one point to add to Joellen's contribution there, I do think that when it comes to matters of identity, DEIJ, any kind of social justice work, there are always going to be people who try to detract from it and divide. And by, asking about differences between, well, what's the difference between DEIJ or DEI or wokeness or social justice? Ultimately, as Joel alluded to, it's about impact more than intention. And we can, and we should talk about those terms and what they mean to different people, but ultimately we shouldn't take our eye away from the goal, which is that we have that equity, that diversity, and that inclusion. And that includes justice, which is sometimes dropped off the acronym because it's possibly one of the most uncomfortable and difficult concepts to deal with. How do we address past wrongs? How do we change radically our approaches and our thinking to ensure that we can have the DEI part of the DEIJ? So I just wanted to add on that little addendum that we really don't want to encourage division within the social justice movement by saying we're this and we're not that. Ultimately, we want to talk about our goals and we want to see those outcomes. And that's what we focus on. That's what sustains us, keeps us energized, because this is challenging and sometimes very exhausting work. It's about keeping our eye on the goal. And of course, we find that goal with our community.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that question that stretched a lot of our thinking today, that Abena and Joellen also contributed so deeply and so intentionally and so thoughtfully. It reminds us of the words of Amelia Gambetti that talks about this work is too difficult and too beautiful to be done alone. So we really lean in that solidarity of our community to work together, to challenge each other, to reflect as a community, and to build on each other's work towards impact. We are down to the last 6 minutes. So there are perhaps other thoughts that are shared on the screen. I know that I think Chika has shared something on the screen, and I invite you to read that as well. There are really powerful thoughts in there. And for now, as we have the last 5 minutes, and what I'd like us to do is probably just to invite our panelists a little bit of like a sentence or two around their final words, sort of a send-off challenge of what might you want to share to our participants today as we go off into our own lives and find those impact in our own spaces. What are some of your final thoughts for our participants today?
I think one thing I would challenge people to do as they're listening, whether you agree or disagree with what you've heard today, whether you think it all sounds very idealistic or it gives you practical next steps, I would ask you to reflect on what you were feeling and thinking as you went through this session. Was there a part of it that made you feel uncomfortable? Was there a part of you that made you feel angry? Was there something that you thought, I could never do that? And maybe that's where your starting point is to move forward in this work. It's what is it that really challenges you and why? And digging into answering that question for yourself is going to be a great starting point for having conversations with other people. So that's what I would invite you to do today. I would also invite you that if anything has particularly struck a chord with you, or again, provoked thinking, that you share it with us in the chat. You can do that either privately to any one of the panelists, or you can do it publicly. We'd love to hear your reflections and thinking around this. Thank you for coming today.
G, would you like to?
I would just, sorry.
Sorry, go
ahead, G.
Go ahead. Yeah.
It's okay, don't worry. I'll go after you, Joellen.
All right, thank you. Friends, I would just like to say you matter. And it is your willingness to open the door to have those conversations with someone who's different than you, someone you haven't spoken to before, someone you might be angry with, someone that you respect and you want to know at a different level, someone that you believe can add to who you are, can contribute to you, someone that might be someone you would never choose to talk to. Open the door, and the door, once it's open, gives you an opportunity to create something you don't have now, and you will never know what you're missing until you grab a hold of the handle and open that door. You have the power to do that. You matter. And by doing that, you will create something for both of you that you don't have now.
Thanks, Abena and Joellen. G?
So I'll just draw all the special bits and bobs from our collective conversation today and say that stay curious. Identity is complex, is nuanced, and it's rooted in disparity. And it's important for us to accept non-closure, that you always have questions, and to communicate openly and proactively, to recognize the power, the positionality, and the privilege in how we take up space, and just essentially to plant seeds with the intention to water. And it is a slow but gradual process.
So powerful framing. Thank you to Abena, to Joellen, to G. Thanks to Francis and our team at ISKL. Thank you to Crystal for really organizing our day today. This has been VOX ISKL, and we really appreciate your time today. All of our friends and community members here at ISKL, we appreciate your time for joining us today. We have about 2 minutes. We'll hold space for everybody. If you want to hang out for a bit, you're more than welcome to. Other than that, we say thank you, and you take care, everybody. We hope to see you again in our next edition of VOX ISKL. Take care, everyone.